Week 5 of the NFL season is going to be kicking off in just a few hours. We've got a Sunday morning matchup in London, a full slate of Sunday games, and a great Monday night matchup for the week. We have injuries piling up, last-minute injuries all over the place. Our first week of NFL bye weeks, so that means that you guys need to check your lineups last minute. And before you do so, here are 10 things you need to know going into week 5 of the 2024 fantasy football season. Let's kick the video off by talking about the fact that Romeo Doubs is not going to play today for the Green Bay Packers. He's been struck with that suspension for conduct detrimental to the team, supposedly unhappy with his role in this offense. Kind of interesting when you break down the targets over the last couple of weeks and all that stuff. On top of that, Christian Watson still dealing with an ankle injury. He's going to be out. That leaves a huge opportunity for Dontavion Wicks, who already had a huge opportunity going into this game based on last week where he had 13 targets, 5 receptions, 2 receiving touchdowns, 24.8 fantasy points, 15.6 yards per catch. Jayden Reed, obviously the wide receiver, 1 today for the Packers. He should be set for a monster game. But this Rams pass defense has just been god-awful throughout the season thus far. Week 1, 217 total yards, 266 total yards in week 2. In week 3, 292 total yards against the Niners. Then last week, actually their best game overall as a pass defense, allowing 157 total pass yards to the Chicago Bears. But overall, they've played very, very poorly against the wide receiver position. DJ Moore, touchdown against them last week. Juwan Jennings, 3 touchdowns against them in week 3. And don't forget, there were several opportunities in that game where Brandon Ayuk was also open. Week 2, Marvin Harrison Jr. was on pace for 60 fantasy points at the end of the first quarter. And in week 1, we saw a breakout game from Jameson Williams against this Rams secondary. They've actually improved in terms of fantasy points allowed since last week because they played decently against the Bears, but the Bears offense has their own problems. This is the Green Bay Packers offense here in week 5. This is a home game for the Rams, but I expect this defense to still struggle. They've been very poor against the run as well. Dontavion Wicks, at the end of the day, is a must-start player. If you picked him up off the waiver wire, if you've been holding on to him, whatever it is, lining up as a wide receiver 2 against this Rams defense that is going to have to account for Jayden Reed as well and apply that defensive pressure to Jayden Reed. Plus, I think the run game for the Packers today and Josh Jacobs is going to be successful. Everything's here for Dontavion Wicks to have another monster performance coming off of a 24.8 fantasy day last week. Wicks is a must start. If you own him, you are starting him going into week 5. Next up, we are looking at Anthony Richardson as doubtful today against the Jacksonville Jaguars on the road, which will lead to Joe Flacco as the starting quarterback for the Colts. But the player I want to look at from that news is going to be Josh Downs at the wide receiver position. Now, this does definitely increase Michael Pittman's fantasy value for the day, but I think overall, Josh Downs sitting at 51% rostered might be more relevant for a lot of you guys out there. Talked about him in yesterday's video as a last-minute waiver ad. Kind of surprised he's still sitting near the 50% mark. He's a super strong start this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars. This team is allowing the 29th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position at the moment. They've been getting absolutely torched week in and week out. Love Josh Downs, but I also want to mention that I went and ran all these stats for Josh Downs as a starter without Anthony Richardson at quarterback and with Anthony Richardson at quarterback. He averages 44.1 total receiving yards, 4.1 receptions per game. So 44.1 receiving yards per game, 4.1 receptions per game without Anthony Richardson at quarterback. And then with Anthony Richardson at quarterback, he averages 50.3 receiving yards per game and 4.3 total receptions. So we break that down. It's not that different, and it's actually slightly better when Anthony Richardson is the starting quarterback, which I found a little bit surprising because it has definitely felt as if when Anthony Richardson is not starting that we see more value out of a player who really relies on total receptions like Josh Downs and is a little bit better when, we've seen quarterbacks like Gardner Minshew or Joe Flacco for half a game as he's starting quarterback. But I think that either way, Josh Downs is a super strong start today. Maybe Richardson, even though he's doubtful, ends up playing. Maybe Joe Flacco is the starter. Richardson is just a super strong start, sitting at just 51% rostered, averaging 13.7 fantasy points per game so far on the season, only playing in 2 games so far, coming off of a 22.2 fantasy day against the Steelers last week. 9 targets, 8 receptions, 82 receiving yards, and a touchdown. Josh Downs, if you're able to pick him up this morning, you need someone to throw in the flex. He is a fantastic start regardless of the quarterback situation moving into week 5. All right, next thing you need to know is that Jeudy is a player that I want to see you guys start in the flex this week. I think Amari Cooper, a very strong start for all the same reasons, but I don't think I really need to talk you guys into starting Amari Cooper. Maybe I do. I mean, he's actually been worse on the season than Jeudy has, but Cooper, super strong start, lots of upside. Should have had that big touchdown last week that was called back. And the Washington Commanders are still allowing the most fantasy points to the wide receiver position on the season thus far. So last week, right? I mean, they played a lot better, a lot improved. It seemed defensively. They only allowed 14 points against the Cardinals. Their offense was absolutely humming. But they still gave up a receiving touchdown to Marvin Harrison Jr. early in that game. The week before against the Bengals, they allowed 3 receiving touchdowns. The week before that against the Giants, 2 receiving touchdowns. And in week 1, 4 receiving touchdowns. So on average, so far on the season, the Commanders are allowing 2.5 receiving touchdowns. And on top of that, they are really, really weak against the quarterback position so far on the season. So even though it's just Deshaun Watson at quarterback, he's got a strong possibility to have a good enough game to support both Jeudy and Amari Cooper in this matchup. But Jeudy has been the better fantasy receiver so far on the season, the more consistent player who's had a much safer floor, averaging 11.4 fantasy points so far on the season, where Cooper's been much more volatile, although, when we break down the targets for Cooper, they've been really good, 9, 8, 12, and 8. But when we look at Jeudy, they're not even that far off, 8, 6, 7, and 9. So I think Jeudy, a super strong start this week. He's sitting at 66% rostered. If you're kind of struggling at who to start in the flex, fire up Jeudy against this Washington Commanders secondary in a position where we are expecting this Commanders offense to keep having a lot of firepower and force the Browns to need to throw the football to keep up. Jeudy is an excellent start. Make sure you are starting him this week. And while you're throwing Jeudy in your starting lineup, I would head straight to Underdog and smash the over on his receiving yards, which is sitting at 47.5. He has hit that in 2 of the last 3 games, and he has this incredible matchup like we just talked about against the Washington Commanders. This line to me is a free gimme, but on top of that, Underdog is giving all new users who sign up with promo code The Catch a free pick 'em to use today. That'll be Dak Prescott over half of a total yard. Use the link down below. Sign up using promo code The Catch. Get your free pick 'em. Pair it with this Jeudy line at 47.5 receiving yards. Take that higher and automatically triple your cash entry. On top of that, Underdog is going to give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 when you sign up with promo code The Catch. That link is down below. Moving along to some running backs, the next thing that you need to know is that Rhamondre Stevenson has got the boot this week. Head coach Gerard Mayo had a talk with him and informed him he was being benched in week 5 against the Miami Dolphins, which is leaving Antonio Gibson, who, by the way, at the time of recording this, is still sitting at 48% rostered as the starting running back for the Patriots against this against this Miami Dolphins run defense. That is god-awful, 29th against the position. They have just been so bad throughout the season. Tajay Spears, Tony Pollard had themselves a day last week against them. Tony Pollard scored the very end of the game. I mean, they both had double-digit fantasy points. The week before that, Zach Charbonnet, in the absence of Kenneth Walker as a starter, double-digit fantasy points, 2 touchdowns against them. The week before that, James Cook, a massive performance. And in week 1, Travis Etienne, a solid performance. They have been so bad, and this team just feels so decimated. They're dealing with injuries on both sides of the football. This team has definitely been, dealing with injuries on the offensive side of the ball, mainly the quarterback position. They've been banged up defensively as well. Jalen Phillips has suffered what is believed to be a season-ending injury. They've been dealing with all kinds of injuries going into the week a little bit banged up. Dolphins team just seems to be in literally the worst place possible going into the week. Everything is there for the Patriots to have a very successful game here in week 5 at home. So am I expecting a lot out of the Patriots offense? No, but I think they're going to run the ball first and foremost with how bad this passing game has been with Jacoby Brissett. I know the offensive line here is a problem for the Patriots, but I don't care. Until further notice, we're starting running backs against this Miami Dolphins defense. Antonio Gibson might still be out there on the waiver wire. He is a strong start today against the Dolphins. All right, and the next thing that you need to know is that DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears is a must-start player going into today's action, and a player that I think is going to continue to improve fantasy-wise after a rough start to the season. Gets the Panthers this week. This team is allowing the most fantasy points to the running back position so far on the season. This is a home game for the Bears, and this is literally the best possible matchup that we could have. Okay, we look back. Week 1, Alvin Kamara ran all over this defense. Week 2, J.K. Dobbins ran all over this defense. Week 3, Zamir White, not so great, but Alexander Madison, who also wasn't so great, at least found the end zone. And then last week, we saw the combination of Zach Moss and Chase Brown combined for 3 total touchdowns against this defense. This defense just cannot defend, opposing running backs. It's that bad. I know Swift has been awful to start the season, but he's coming off of a game against a Rams defense that's also awful against the run. 29.5 fantasy points, 7 targets, 7 receptions, 72 receiving yards, 93 yards on the ground, 5.81 yards per carry, and a touchdown. I've talked about this throughout the week. I talked about it last week as well. He's going to get Jacksonville in week 6. Then he's going to have a bye week. He's going to get Washington and Arizona. This stretch for DeAndre Swift, I think we're going to be reminded of, why DeAndre Swift was a valuable running back last year for a majority of the season with the Philadelphia Eagles. I know Roschon Johnson's been involved. I think he's a great stash, but the volume here, 16 touches compared to 7 touches last week, 7 targets compared to 0 targets last week between Swift and Roschon Johnson. If you own DeAndre Swift, who still has found a way to average 12.2 fantasy points per game so far on the season, I say fire him up. Look at this matchup. We can't ignore it. This is the best potential matchup for any running back going into week 5. Home game for the Bears. I know there are still problems with Caleb Williams at quarterback, with this offensive line, all that stuff. But DeAndre Swift is a must-start player in week 5. The thing that you need to know is that the Dallas Cowboys run defense is still awful and allowing the 30th most fantasy points to the running back position so far on the season. And now they're going into Sunday Night Football without Micah Parsons and without DeMarcus Lawrence, 2 of their best players, if not their best players on the defensive side of the ball, who all line up, of course, on the defensive line. So that leads Najee Harris, who will be the starting running back for the Steelers, because Cordell Patterson is out dealing with an injury, and Jaylen Warren is also out dealing with an injury. I'm not worried about Jonathan Ward or Aaron Shamplin, 2 guys I've never heard of, no offense to them. Taking away too many touches from Najee Harris, he becomes a must-start tonight, averaging 10.3 fantasy points per game on the season. It hasn't been great for Najee. He hasn't found the end zone, but he's been the workhorse running back for the Steelers in this Arthur Smith system all season long. He is the running back who's been the most involved in the passing game. He has at least 5 targets in the last 2 games. Sunday Night Football at home for the Steelers. I feel very good about Najee Harris tonight, especially with his banged up defensive line for the Cowboys. That's about as simple as a start gets, but Najee is a guy who, hasn't shown that upside. Like I said, hasn't found the end zone, might be sitting on your bench that you don't feel so great about. Najee's a fantastic start tonight. Maybe the ceiling's not crazy high, but the floor is super safe, and I easily think this could be Najee's best overall performance of the fantasy season yet. I'm just going to leave it at that. If you don't know, Cowboys' 2 best players up front on defense are out. I know Micah Parsons still might play, but if he does play, he's banged up. DeMarcus Lawrence is out. And this run defense has still been awful so far on the season. Week 1, we saw Jerome Ford score on them. Week 2, we saw Kamara come through with 4 touchdowns. Then we saw Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson just run completely all over the place on this defense. Week 4, in a short week, they were okay against the Giants, but that's the Giants. Like, come on, we'll give that a pass. Overall, still 30th against the running back position from a fantasy perspective. Najee Harris, fantastic start going into Sunday Night Football. I also think Justin Fields in that same matchup is a fantastic start. This is a player who we know has been slowly improving in this offense, winning football games for the Steelers, and now is at a point where he's starting to win fantasy matchups for us. Go back to last week, 31.9 fantasy points against the Colts, 55 yards on the ground, 2 rushing touchdowns. A week before that, 19.4 fantasy points. His worst rushing performance of the season, but he ran for a touchdown and threw for a touchdown. Overall, Fields has just improved each and every week, and we've seen this offense start to gel a bit more, open up a bit more. The system is working. Believe it or not, the Arthur Smith system is working, and this is a great opportunity because, like we just talked about, the Cowboys struggle against the run. But I want to go back and look at what Lamar Jackson did to them in week 3. 14 rushing attempts, 87 yards on the ground, and a rushing touchdown. I know we're not comparing the same player whatsoever at all here between Justin Fields and Lamar Jackson, but we know that Fields has the ability to make plays with his legs, and I think that's going to come through tonight. Fields is sitting as the quarterback 7 right now in fantasy football. He's a super strong start as well against this Cowboys run defense here in week 5. All right, another super strong quarterback start this week is going to be Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers, currently sitting as the quarterback 14 in fantasy football. I feel like Purdy's not getting a lot of love, but if we take away Thursday night's matchup between the Falcons and the Buccaneers, then Brock Purdy would be the QB2 in terms of passing yards on the season. If you guys are watching the Niners games on a weekly basis, Purdy looks great, very accurate. He's airing out the football. He just hasn't thrown a lot of touchdowns, just 5 touchdowns so far on the season. Compare that to Baker Mayfield, who is in front of him right now in passing yards, has 11. Compare that to Kirk Cousins, who's number 1 in passing yards, has 8. So Purdy, maybe not throwing a ton of touchdowns, but overall looks in control of this offense. Of course, he's been, with and without different playmakers, different injuries to Kittle, Debo, obviously Christian McCaffrey. Ayuk's got off to a slow start, but they're going to continue to improve in this Kyle Shanahan system on a week in, week out basis. 10.3 fantasy points in week 1, 14.9 in week 2, 25.7 in week 3, 15.6 in week 4. Purdy will be better, and I think this is the week that we could see another high ceiling like we saw against the Rams in week 3. So Purdy, if you own him against this Cardinals defense that has been struggling as of late, coming off of a huge loss to the Commanders where Jaden Daniels was near perfect. This is a road game for the Cardinals, home game for the Niners. I think Brock Purdy is going to put up a big fantasy performance. If you own Purdy, don't overthink it. He's a fantastic start in week 5. If you need a streaming option at quarterback, I do like Trevor Lawrence going up against the Indianapolis Colts at home. Trevor Lawrence has a passer rating of 100.8, over 1,200 passing yards, 9 passing touchdowns, and 2 interceptions in his 6 career games against the Indianapolis Colts. He tends to play well against the Colts. I know he's been struggling to start the season, but he averages 1.5 passing touchdowns against the Colts. He's only thrown for less than 2 passing touchdowns against the Colts 2 times in his career, so 2 out of those 6 games. And overall, those stats are pretty dang good. Trevor Lawrence, off to an awful start on the season, though. The quarterback 21 in fantasy, 11.2, 13.3, 10.4, 14.7. Those are his stat lines. He has only thrown 4 touchdowns on the season, 1 interception, and the overall passing yards have been very bad. He's in between Caleb Williams, Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson, and Bo Nix. Makes you feel better. I mean, He's only 2 spots behind Josh Allen. That makes you feel better. But we also know Allen can do it with his legs, right? But yeah, this Jaguars team has just been struggling. And part of that is good for fantasy football. The offensive side of things, not good for fantasy football. But because this defense is struggling and I expect the Colts to have success today offensively, that's going to put the Jaguars in position like we saw last week against the Texans where they need to throw the football. And the Colts so far on the season have been awful against opposing quarterbacks. CJ Stroud picked them apart in week 1. Malik Willis didn't quite pick them apart in week 2, but he did as he wanted in that game and ran all over the place, put up a high fantasy stat line. In week 3, they were a little bit better defensively. Caleb Williams didn't have the best day against him, and that's a rookie quarterback, And then last week, Justin Fields, who we just talked about, had a huge day against them, both through the air and on the ground. So Trevor Lawrence, if you need someone to stream, he's sitting at 47% roster. I think a lot of people actually went into this week potentially wanting to stream him with some teams on bye weeks and some last-minute injuries to the position, Anthony Richardson, stuff like that. So Trevor Lawrence, I think, is a solid start going into week 5. Sticking with the Jaguars, Evan Engram, who's listed as questionable, is not expected to play, still dealing with that hamstring injury. So enter Brenton Strange. He's been a popular streaming option at the tight end position so far on the season. A little disappointed in week 4 at 4.9 fantasy points, but he does sit at the tight end 15 overall in fantasy. And tight end play has been so bad this year. If you're dealing with injuries, right now we don't know if David Njoku is going to play. If he does play, it's a bad matchup. The Commanders have been really good against the tight end position. We've got other players like Trey McBride coming, last minute in with a rib injury. Brenton Strange is just 9% rostered, and the Colts are giving up the 31st most fantasy points to the tight end position so far on the season. So Brenton Strange, who has a touchdown in week 3 with 9.2 fantasy points, who had 3 receptions for 65 receiving yards in week 2 against the Browns for 9.5 fantasy points, walks back in as a viable streaming option at the tight end position if you need someone to plug and play last minute. That'll do it for today's video. There are 10 things you need to know. Actually, 11 things. I really was supposed to kind of combine that Najee, Justin Fields part a little bit more, but that was supposed to be like one thing, or maybe Brenton Strange is our bonus. 11 things that you need to know before going into today's action. Don't forget, I'm answering all fantasy football questions in the comment section down below. If you guys need anything whatsoever, I will answer every single comment on this video before Sunday's games kick off. And by Sunday's game, I mean the later games. I probably won't get to every comment before the London game, but regardless, good luck today here in week 5. If you guys need anything, drop the comments down below. Don't forget, we have everything that you guys need on the channel for week 5 of 2024 fantasy football, and going into week 6, we'll continue to have everything that you guys need on a week in, week out basis to bring home a dub. So make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel so that you don't miss out on any of the content. With that, I'll say good luck today, everyone, and remember, you saw it here on The Catch.